We're going to get a little ahead of ourselves here, but it's okay because we're going to be talking about the paragraphs and the keyword outline at the same time, and you'll see what I mean. So retelling narrative stories is our new structure, and we are talking about what each paragraph will include, but we're also talking about what each keyword outline will include. Obviously, the keyword outline is only going to have the high points, the most important information, and then your paragraph will flesh out those details and give us a lot more information. So, characters and setting. What do we mean by characters? Characters are the who of the story. Who is in the story and what are they like? They are not limited to people or personified characters. Some things are vital to the story. Think of the ring in Lord of the Rings. What do we mean by setting? This is the when and where of the story. The setting will be literally where it is, what it's like where it is, and also what time it's set during. It could be in the 1920s, it could be in the 1800s, it could be now. All over the place there. In this paragraph, we will include anything, or in this keyword outline, we will include anything that sets the stage and is necessary for the story. It does not need to include a character that comes in later. So if you see a new character in chapter 10 or in, paragraph 10 or paragraph 5 or whatever, from your key, your source text, you would not need to include that character in the first keyword outline. Specifically, our source text, our story, has 5 paragraphs. If by chance a new character was mentioned for the first time in paragraph 5, we would not include that character in our paragraph 1 characters and setting keyword outline. And we would also not mention them in our characters and setting paragraph. So now we are looking at the conflict or problem keyword outline, or the conflict or problem paragraph, which would be our second one. What do you think the conflict of the story would be? The conflict is what the main character needs or wants. Consider what the main character or characters do, say, think, feel as the problem rises and as they deal with the conflict. So again, this is keyword outline versus paragraph. Your keyword outline is not going to flesh out all of these thoughts and all of these feelings. You might see that they feel scared, so you would put scared in your keyword outline, but you're not going to, expound on that like you would in a paragraph form. Again, hitting the high points for that keyword outline. Every story has a struggle. Every story you read, every story you listen to, every story that you watch in a form of a show or a movie has a struggle. The main character or characters need something, but someone or something is in the way. This paragraph includes an explanation, or keyword outline. It includes an explanation of the problem and how it builds until we get to the ... And we'll get to that in just a second. So again, your keyword outline is going to explain the struggle or the conflict that is going on, or the problem. And then once you write your paragraph, you're going to flesh that out in more detail. Okay, so this paragraph includes an explanation of the problem and how it builds until we get to the climax and resolution. What do you think the climax of the story is? It's the action that leads to the conflict being solved. It is the event that, quote unquote, turns the tides, or is the, quote unquote, light at the end of the tunnel. It's the moment when everything changes, and after that, the problem can be resolved. What do you think a resolution is? The resolution is what happened as a result of the problem being solved. There may also be a lesson learned, a message, or a moral to consider as part of the resolution. Your keyword outline will have the most important points of the climax and resolution. Again, you're not fleshing it all out in that keyword outline. That happens later when you're rewriting and putting it in paragraph form. So read source text page 44. Keep these 3 parts of the SSC in mind as we read. So we've already read our passage. And then it says, I sometimes find it easiest to think about the 3 parts of the SSC and narrow down the problem and the climax before we start the keyword outline. I do this because sometimes it is easy to just keep thinking of and answering questions and not know exactly when to move to the next keyword outline section. Okay, I do this because sometimes it's easy to just keep thinking of and answering questions and not know exactly when to move to the next keyword outline section. So instead of doing those, we just think about the 3 parts and we start to process. Okay, so let's look at this real quick. This would be our visual. I don't know why it keeps doing that. This would be our visual for a storyline hill. We can see here that we have the characters and setting. Nothing's really exciting here, right? We're just setting the scene. Then we have the rising action with the conflict or problem. We have the top of the action, which is the climax, and then we have the falling action, which would be the resolution. Okay, so we're going to look and see what would be the problem. What would you say the problem is in the story that we read? What do the main characters need or want? The British Army wanted to capture Fort Duquesne. So we would write this point going up the hill. So it's not the characters in the setting, it is the conflict or the problem. Let's see, the British wanted to capture Fort Duquesne. Okay, so what would you say the climax is of the story? The point when the situation turned around and things changed. When did that happen? So people were being killed, bad things were happening, but who took control? Washington. Washington took control. So we would have Washington took control. That's the moment when everything changed. And then it says we will keyword outline this idea on the first line of the climax paragraph, which would be paragraph 3. There may be different ideas about what the climax is in a story. Discuss it with the students or your student and let them make the final decision about what moment goes on their first climax line when they do it at home. So you could go back and you could use a characters and setting. You could use this one. Let's do this. You could use this page of the PDF, which I uploaded, and do your own story timeline hill, and you could fill in the characters and the setting, the conflict or the problem, the climax and the resolution. That is one way to do it. The keyword outline is the IEW way, as far as it's okay to start with this. This is a real quick visual way to do this, and try and figure it out while you're reading along and you're underlining things, So you're back here and you're looking at it and you've got your storyline hill sitting there maybe next to you, and you're going to start maybe jotting down some of those characters and setting details. Once you realize that there's a conflict or problem, you could write that on the rising action. Once you see anything that really, really changes the story and how it's going, you would write that on the climax line or the climax area. And then anything that happens after that that's super important would be your resolution. You could take that story hill that you have been making notes on, and then you could do your keyword outline in conjunction. So you would take your hill, possibly, and your underlined version of the story, and you could use both of those to do your keyword outline. Is that necessary? Absolutely not. Definitely not. You could just use the underlined source text to move forward. So here we go. Now that we have the starting points, let's go to the beginning and work on the first paragraph. Here are a few helpful things to keep in mind as we do. The questions in the keyword outline do not have to be answered in order. We've talked about this. They're just there to help you think about the elements of the story. You do not have to answer every question, and some questions may need more than one line in the keyword outline. And like it said earlier, you might even be able to put 2 answers on one line. There are 5 small paragraphs in the source text, but we're going to write 3 paragraphs when we're done. Why? Because those 3 paragraphs are written, that we write are based on the SSC, not the source. All right. Okay, so our first paragraph, our first keyword outline and our first paragraph is going to be about our characters and setting. It should set the stage for the story. If you look at page 45 next to the outline, there are some questions you can ask yourself to help you come up with the information for the keyword outline. Chances are you've already underlined this if you're going through as a detective looking for those important clues. Questions include: when does the story happen? Who is in the story? What are they like? Where do they live or go? And remember, not the entire setting and characters will not always be fleshed out in that very first paragraph, right? Sometimes it might even take a chapter, depending on what you're reading, to set that, to completely flesh out the setting and characters for you. So let's look at the questions that are on page 45, but we see them here. When or where does the story happen? Summer, 1775, Forest, Ohio, River Valley. Who is in the story? General Braddock, British Army. What do we know about him and the Army? Well trained in the fields of England, not the forest of America. Who else is in the story and what is he like? General Washington, young officer. Okay, so, or George Washington, General George Washington. So why do we include that? Let's go back and look. We're going to look here at paragraph 1 and 2, and we see that we have not yet reached the conflict or the problem, right? Anything that's listed before the conflict or the problem is going to be our setting and characters. So because paragraph 3 starts to list our problem, we can guarantee anything above that is going to be our settings and character information. And since George Washington was not general, I don't think he was a general yet. Since George Washington was listed in paragraph 2, then we can say that he is part of the characters in the setting. If he came after the problem, then that would be a different story. I'm sorry, I'm scrolling all over here trying to figure out where we are. Okay. How is he different from General Braddock? He knows the terrain and he knows the forests. What else do we know about him? He's experienced with the French and Indian Wars, and he knows the tactics of the Native Americans, I believe is what it said. Let's go back and make sure. It says battles with the French and Indian forces, so he knew their tactics. Okay. Moving on. Second paragraph, second keyword outline is going to be about the conflict or problem. What did we decide the problem was? Referring back to that hill illustration, it would be that rising action, that upward hill note. The British Army wanted to capture Fort Duquesne. So we would write that in the first keyword outline of paragraph 2. That the British desired to capture Fort Duquesne. And that's how they chose to shorten that down. Now, we'll add some details to the problem to further explain it in our paragraph, right? Or we can actually add some details in our keyword outline. We'll use some of the questions suggested in the box next to the outline to fill in the section. Who are they trying to take it from? So the French fort, keep the Brits out. So let's go back and look. The French had built this fort to keep the British out of the Ohio River Valley. We're in paragraph 3 here. The French had built this fort to keep the British out of the Ohio River Valley. So who are they taking it from, or who are they trying to take it from? They're trying to take it from the French. And the fort was built to keep the Brits out. We can see that right here. Whoops. French fort, keep Brits out. So who are they trying to take it from? The French. Why do they want it? It's valuable. Valuable land. Why? Because there are rivers and they can use it for trading. What happens? So 10 miles out, shots and shouts. What happens next? French Indian attacked massively, greatly, and General Braddock. Let's see. Braddock and the soldiers panic. So let's go back and look what happens next. Words in brackets will be replaced with symbols later. So we can, what is that? Rivers, we would do that with that. So let's go back and look here. What happens next? So 10 miles away, the fierce Indians and the ruthless French soldiers charged at the British. So the Indians and the French are charging at all sides. So we'll go back here. French and Indian attack General Braddock. Okay. So now let's look at our third paragraph. Our third paragraph is about the climax or the turning point and the resolution. What did we put at the peak of our KWO hill, at our storyline hill? Washington took control. This is our climax. So let's write that in the first KWO line paragraph of paragraph 3. Washington took control. And we'll do this in a moment. Now let's, KWO, what happens as a result of the climax? What does happen? So he takes control. They fought hard. 4 shots go through his coat. What else happens? 2 horses shot from underneath of him. And then what? He led the men to safety. What are the results? Is that the end? Does anything else happen? Okay, he wasn't captured. At the fort, George Washington was hailed a hero. Is there a moral? Not really, just a retelling of a historical event. As time allows, spend some time telling back the story. So again, what's our point? Once we have filled out the keyword outlines, we should be able to completely put away the source text and we should be able to tell the story based on the keyword outline only. So I'm going to go for just a second and I'll be right back. Just pause. Okay. Thank you for your patience. Here we go. So we're looking at our keyword outline here. We're going to do this together. Now, you can do this independently and use your own notes that you thought were important, but for the sake of working through it, we're going to do it together. So here we go. Characters and setting. What do we know? We know that it was summer. And this again would be from the first thing that you saw. It was 1775 in a forest. In the Ohio River, Valley. Good grief. Let's fix that. Okay. That is a terrible R, y'all. Let's try that one more time. There. Okay. Who's the first person that we hear about? General Braddock. With who? The British Army. Okay. What do we know about them? Like we said before, well-trained Or you could even do plus plus trained in the fields, but not the forests. Okay, and then we hear about Washington. Young. And he was going to aid them. What about him? What is told to us about George Washington? He knew about the forests of America, and he was experienced. In the French and Indian War tactics. Oops, we need a comma there, don't we? Okay. Then we're going to go to the conflict or the problem. What does the main character want or need? Well, we've got General Braddock with the British Army. What does he want or need? He wants or he desires to capture Fort Duquesne. What was the purpose of the fort? Are we there yet? No, but it's important to know why they want Fort Duquesne and what the purpose of the fort was. So we underlined that earlier, and we're going to say that it was a fort to keep the Britons, or the British, off the land. But the Britain people, the Brits, what did they believe? What's it say? What do they think or say or feel? Okay, the Brits believed that they owned that land. And you could even, you've got Brits, that's short. So you've got believed, owned, and you could say land. That would be your 3 words there. Okay, then we have what happens before the climax. So anything before Washington taking control. Anything else that's important before Washington taking control we can talk about here. So we can say that 10 miles out, what did they hear? They heard, that's my little ear there. That's a terrible ear, you guys. They heard, and hopefully that would I would remember that was an ear. They heard shots and shouts. And why did they hear shots and shouts? Well, the French and Indians attacked them. And killed General Braddock. Oh, we better do Jen. For speed, right? General Braddock. Okay. And then we have a very short sentence there at the end. The soldiers panicked. Okay, so now we're at the climax and resolution. What did we decide was at the tip top of that hill? The tip top of that hill was that Washington took control. And that is the next big thing that's mentioned. Washington took control. What do we know about big exciting things were happening while that climax was going on. He did take control of the battle, but there was things that were going on while he was taking control. 2 horses shot under. Okay, and then it says that, where did it go? Musket balls and arrows, right? So we can say arrows, right? And musket balls. And 4 times coat. And hopefully we would remember, that he was shot 4 times through his coat. And what was another big thing that happened after that? It says that he was still able to lead many of the survivors to safety. So he led many, or we could even say led plus men to safety. Okay, and they escaped with their lives. They escaped with their lives, and George Washington was a hero. So were they captured? They were not captured. Let's see. The ambush in the wilderness was just one of many battles. Okay, so let's back up again. Still, he was able to lead many of the survivors to safety. They escaped with their lives, and George Washington was hailed a hero. So, escape. I'm just going to write escaped. And then with lives. And it says that he was hailed a hero, and the ambush in the wilderness was just one of the many battles of the French and Indian War that lasted. So we're going to say that, now do they have that on? That is 2 different sentences. Escape with lives, and we could just go ahead and say hero, G-W, hero. That's 1 word, 2 words, 3 words. Good, we're still good there. GW, hero. And our final one would be that the ambush in the wilderness was just one of the many battles of the French and Indian War that lasted from 1754 to 1763. Now, if you found it important to have those years, you would want to include that on your KWO because you're not going to be looking back at that source text. So you could say battle, one of many of the French and Indian Wars, 1754. Let's do that. 1754, 1763. Battle won. I'm going to make sure that's a 1, not an I. Battle won many French-Indian wars. And even if you might wonder later what that was, we have enough words. We could say battle. Okay. So that would be our keyword outline. We would use our keyword outline and we would rewrite the text. We would rewrite the story using just your keyword outline. So a test is the best thing. I would say best practice. Best practice is to do your keyword outline and wait at least 24 hours before you start writing your story. Because it's going to be a good test for you to know whether you're doing a good job writing your keyword outline or not. If you wait 24 hours and you look at your keyword outline and you cannot figure out what the story was based on your keyword outline, then it means you need to fine-tune those skills on translating it into a keyword outline a little bit better. And we definitely had to work through this when we were in our first tour. We do the keyword outline on Friday, and then Monday he starts his paper. So that gives the whole weekend to sort of, I want to say forget the source text, but you're just not as familiar with it. And so when he looks back at that keyword outline on Monday, it's a really good way to figure out whether or not he translated that well and if he can tell what the story is. If you find that it is not translated well, then you can just go back and figure out if you had symbols that didn't make sense to you, if you shortened the words too much, or if you left too many details out. And you can just fine tune that process to make your keyword outlines more effective for the future. So that would be the end of that. And during the rewriting, we're going to have a new decoration, which is alliteration. What is alliteration? Let's see. Let's say you wanted to decorate your room with posters. Would you use the same poster over and over again? Would you cover your entire room with posters? Would you use just a few different posters or different ones so that they're easier to focus on and enjoy? Using decorations in our writing is like decorating a room with posters. They make our writing more interesting. But if we use the same one over and over again, or if we use too many of them, they can become distracting. In our writing, we will use all our dress-ups, ly adverbs, who, which clauses, and the ones not yet learned in every paragraph. Ding, 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 ding. This is something that we missed on Tour 1 for a little bit. Each one of those goes in each paragraph, not just one throughout your entire writing. So you're going to have 3 paragraphs here. Each one of your 3 paragraphs, best practice, will have an ly adverb, a who, which clause, and some alliteration. Okay? Each paragraph. But for our decorations, we will aim to add only 1 in each paragraph we write. We don't want to have 15 ly adverbs in each paragraph. We don't want to have 15 who, which clauses in each paragraph, etc. We don't want all of those all the time in multiples. Our very first decoration is alliteration. You have download information in the beginning of your IEW manual. It tells you how to download everything from the IEW website. So, does anyone know what alliteration is? Alliteration is 3 or more words close together that begin with the same sound. Alliteration is also discussed on page 184 of the TWSS and page 131 of the SRP. If you look at our band page, just one second. Okay, if you look at our band page has alliteration. So kudos to anybody who can come to class and tell me that our band page has alliteration in the title of the band page. I'll give you 5 extra store bucks if you tell me that. Okay? But you got to tell me quietly in private so not other people hear it. And they're like, oh yeah, that too. Because we want to make sure that they got this assignment through the video. All right, so alliteration. 3 or more words close together that begin with the same sound. Alliteration, here we go. I noticed a couple examples in the story that repeated sounds twice, but jumped out with a repeated sound 3 times, but none jumped out. So very valuable. Shots and shouts, survivors, safety. Those are close together. They don't have to be one right after the other, but they are in close proximity. And they very valuable, both start with V. Shots, shouts, both start with S. Survivors, safety, both start with S. Here are some examples, not from the source, with the sound repeating in 3 words. The soldiers saw some movement in the trees. Clumsily, they clambered down the cliff. So see, there was 2 words in between there. They do not have to be right on top of each other. IEW defines alliteration as 3 or more words close together in a sentence, but 2 right next to each other is a good way to start. So here we go. Here's a fun alliteration overload. We would not want to do this, guys. We would not want to. This would be like having a billion posters in your room, or those cards that you see that have bumper stickers all over them. It's just a little much, right? So here we go. Feeling footloose, fancy free, and frisky, a feather-brained fellow finagled his fond father into forking over his fortune. Forthwith, he fled to foreign fields and frittered his farthings, feasting fabulously with fair-weathered friends. Y'all see which letter the alliteration is leaning on here? Finally, facing famine and fleeced by his fellows in folly, he found himself a feed flinger in a filthy farm lot. At his father's farm, he fain would have filled his frame with foraged food from the fodder fragments. Phooey! My father's flunkies have far fancier. The frazzled fugitive fumed feverishly, frankly facing fact. Frustrated from failure and filled with forebodings, he fled forth to his family. Falling at his father's feet, he floundered forlornly. Father, I have flunked and fruitlessly forfeited further family favors. But the faithful father, forestalling further flinching, frantically flagged his flunkies to set forth the finest fatling and fix a feast. I'm just going to make a note here that I don't think they were flunkies, but I understand they did this for the point of alliteration. The fugitive's fault-finding frater, which means brother, who had faithfully farmed his father's fields for free, frowned at this fickle forgiveness of formal fodderall. His fury flashed, but fussing was futile. His far-sighted father figured, such filial fidelity is fine, but what forbids fervent festivities for the fugitive who is found? Unfurl the flags, with fanfare flaring, let fun, frolic, and frivolity freely flow. Former failures are forgotten, and folly is forsaken. Forgiveness forms a firm foundation for future fortitude. Isn't that cool? That's a lot, though. And it's like a Dr. Seuss tongue twister is what it's like. So we want to add those, but we don't want to do nearly that much, right? And each paragraph is going to have some form of alliteration in it. Complete the keyword outline on page 45 using the story sequence chart and practice retelling what your outline says. Parents can write this retelling into the student's first rough draft, or you can type it up, or you can write it yourself. The goal of the keyword outline is to organize your thoughts so that you can rewrite the story without needing the source text. Since this is an inventive unit, don't feel limited by the keyword outline. It provides your frame, but you can embellish and add details as you go along. You don't have to stick to just the facts that are listed in the source text. Take a little liberty and add some details. For students doing this for the first time, it's best to stick to a fairly close retelling of the original. As students become more comfortable, they can try embellishing and changing stories. See TWSS page 32 for suggested variations. But don't get bogged down, don't get overloaded, don't get stressed out. Use the checklist to add style to your story. Have your editor edit it. Make final edits and mark your published copy. And does it say, yes, and we want to make sure we have it in the correct format, which everybody's got that. Be ready to share your paragraph in class this upcoming week. You may be asked to choose your favorite so everyone can share. So we've got our reading groups. I think we'll be okay on timing with just sticking to the reading group. Okay, so lesson overview is here. I'm not going to read through all of it. You can pause the video and look. And it's got some first year scaling information and scaling it up as well. So you can look at all of that. But if anybody has any questions, let me know. And we did math with Miss Carolyn's class with the I Have Who Has cards, and we played Jack Attack. It was lots of fun. If you have any questions about that, let me know. Guys, have a great day. For IEW, we have our vocabulary charades that we did, and now we have 4 lists to choose from. And they're all bolded because we have done them all. Next week we will have additional vocabulary words to choose from. And we're going to go over the stylistic techniques that we have covered. We've gone over the ly adverb. We've gone over the vocabulary that we just were looking at. we have added in a who-which clause. And then we've talked about how the title is formed or made from repeating or reflecting 1 to 3 keywords from the final sentence. So the question is, which comes first, the title or the final sentence? Kind of like the chicken or the egg, right? So per IEW, the final sentence comes first, and the title is formed or written by using 1 to 3 keywords from that final sentence. So again, repeats or reflects 1 to 3 keywords from the final sentence. The red group read this week. They did an amazing job. Everybody's papers were great. Okay, so our new structure is retelling narrative stories. This is a new unit, and we are retelling narrative stories. This week we are going to learn how to retell a narrative story. Retelling narrative stories. Have any of you ever read 2 versions of the same story? They likely have had the same message, but with different details. Think of Robin Hood. The moral is the same, steal from the rich and give to the poor, but the details vary depending on which version you are reading or watching or listening to. So also, Cinderella is like that. Cinderella has a lot of different versions. It's really interesting if you go look through the internet, how many different versions of Cinderella there are. And like it said, a lot of times the moral or the point of the story is the same, but the details can be vastly different. So today we're going to learn to do something similar. We're going to read a short story, it says in class, and create a keyword outline in order to organize our thoughts so we can retell the story. So that's the same. We're still making a keyword outline in order to retell the story. This unit can be challenging because there are 3 paragraphs to do. So, well, this is a little bit different, but I'm gonna speak it because we're watching a video here. So we're going to work through making a keyword outline, and we're gonna do it together on this one. But we're gonna talk a lot about what it takes to make the keyword outline and what the parts are before we ever even get started, okay? So we're going to move to here, and we're going to look at page 43. So you have your student book, and moms or dads or whoever, you've got your parents' book with a teacher guide. And you're going to look at page 43. And what you have on page 43 is a story sequence chart. It's also on the portable walls that can be purchased through CC. Okay, so here's page 43. And it has the new structure, retelling narrative stories. In Unit 3, you will focus on story writing. Every story, regardless of how long it is, contains the same basic elements: character and setting. Oh, it's not wanting to work. Hold on a minute here. Yep, we're at 60. Okay, so characters and setting. Conflict or problem, and climax and resolution. As a result, you will use a new method of note-taking. To create an outline for a story, you will not choose words from each sentence like you did in Units 1 and 2. Instead, you will choose keywords by asking questions about a story using the story sequence chart. So here we have the story sequence chart below. The story sequence chart has 3 Roman numerals. 1, 2, 3. That is because the assignments in Unit 3 are each 3 paragraphs long. Each paragraph has a distinct purpose. The first paragraph tells about the people or animals in the story and when and where they live. The second paragraph tells about the conflict or problem that occurs within the story. The third paragraph begins with the climax and the turning point in the story, and ends with the resolution, the events that occur after the climax. I'll read that again. The third paragraph begins with the climax, the turning point in the story, and ends with the resolution, the events that occur after the climax. So we're just going to look at these real quick. We have characters and setting. Who is in the story? What are they like? When does it happen? Where do they live or go? We have the conflict or problem. What do they need or want? What do they think? What do they say and do? Climax and resolution. How is the problem or the need resolved? What happens after and what is learned? Read the source text and then use the story sequence chart to analyze the story. Begin with the characters and setting. Ask the questions within each section in any order. For example, in section 1, it does not matter whether you introduce the characters or the setting first. You might have a preference of how you do that. You might choose to do it in order of how the story lays it out. Sometimes they talk about the setting. Sometimes they talk about the characters. The answers to the questions become the details for the outline. That's very important. The answers to the questions become the details for the outline. As you answer a question, write 2 or 3 keywords on the keyword outline form. Use symbols, numbers, and abbreviations when possible. You do not have to answer every question. You may need more than one line to answer one question, or you may be able to answer 2 questions on one line. Keep your answers brief. You can add more details when you write your own version of the story. So we're going to change now to here. And this is just a recap of this, okay? So every story you've read, every story you've watched or listened to contain the same 3 basic elements: characters and setting, conflict or problem, climax, and resolution. To make a keyword outline for a story, we need a different type of outline. This is just repeating from before, we are not going to look at each line of each paragraph like we did before. Instead, we're going to have 3 outlines. So before, in units 1 and 2, we had 1 keyword outline per paragraph. We are going to look at a reading passage that has 5 paragraphs, but we are only going to have 3 outlines, 1 for each basic story element. 1 keyword outline for the characters and setting, 1 keyword outline for the conflict or problem, and 1 keyword outline for the climax and resolution. To fill in these outlines, we're going to learn to ask key questions about the story. We will start by reading the story. Oh, it's missing. Oh, wait, no, it's not. We have to look at this first. Note the historical information on page 42. If you would like to look at that before we start reading, you could pause and go check that out. Also, the pronunciation of the fort that we will be reading about is pronounced Duquesne. Duquesne. It looks like Duquesne or Duquesne, but it's Duquesne. And I have checked that out online to make sure that's correct. Okay, so here we go. Ambush in the wilderness. Just follow along here. It was a hot summer day in 1755, but the forest of the Ohio River Valley seemed dark, gloomy, and eerily quiet. The British Army trudged on, led by General Edward Braddock. Braddock was a well-trained, experienced officer. However, his training and experience had been on the vast open fields of England, not in the dense wilderness of America. Additionally, he knew little of the ways of the Native American warriors. A young American officer was at his side. His name was George Washington. Washington knew the terrain of the land well. He had spent much time in the woods. He also had already been involved in battles with the French and Indian forces, so he knew their tactics. The objective of the British Army was to capture Fort Duquesne. The French had built this fort to keep the British out of the Ohio River Valley. This particular land was very valuable because it had several rivers needed for trading goods. The British believed the land belonged to them. The soldiers were now just 10 miles from the fort, hoping for a quick victory. Suddenly, shots and shouts rang out. Fierce Indians and ruthless French soldiers charged at the British from all sides. They quickly killed many of the officers, including General Braddock. The soldiers panicked. Washington soon took control. He fought hard. 2 horses were shot out from under him. Musket balls and arrows whizzed by him, and 4 shots tore right through his coat. Still, he was able to lead many of the survivors to safety. They escaped with their lives, and George Washington was hailed a hero. This ambush in the wilderness was just one of the many battles of the French and Indian War that lasted from 1754 to 1763. So now that we've read the story, we need to read it again and underline important facts that stand out to us. Everybody's paper, when underlining it, will be a little bit different than others. Some of the facts in the papers really should be underlined by everyone. There are some extremely important things that everybody would want to make sure that they include in their paper. There's some less important details that some people might really think are wonderful to share, and other people might not think that they're super important or need to be shared. So my underlining is going to be a little bit different than yours if you were doing this on your own. So I'm not going to reread the paper again. You could pause it and look at what I underlined, or you can ignore my underlining completely and go back to the source text in your student manual and underline the things that you think are important. Okay, so we will use the source text, the story, and the questions in the SSC, which the SSC again is right here. That's the story sequence chart on page 43. And again, the story sequence chart is also on page 45. To fill in a keyword outline using the same KWO rules as before. What are they? 3 words maximum, 3 written out words maximum. Symbols and numbers are free. So we've got the character and setting, the conflict or problem, and the climax and resolution, and we've got the questions that go with each